Most people have not read the Bible from cover to cover, and those who have often come across passages that are puzzling and difficult to grasp. Even when the Bible is taught, these passages are not mentioned because they're hard to explain. Yet, although these texts may seem unusual, they carry hidden meanings. Today, we are uncovering the 10 strangest passages in the Bible, along with their interpretations. Let's get started. 1. The stones that allow conversations with God. In the Bible, mysterious stones, known as the Urim and Thummim, appear on several occasions. These were carefully kept in the high priest's garments carried close to his heart. The priest carried them inside the breastplate of judgment, a special garment worn over his chest. The main purpose of the Urim and Thummim was to directly seek God's will. The Bible describes their use on many occasions. In the book of Samuel, David was fleeing from King Saul, who was pursuing him, intent on killing him. While David was in the wilderness, he learned that the Philistines were attacking the city of Keilah and raiding its threshing floors. Facing this urgent situation, David felt the need to act, but also sought guidance from God. David called for Abiathar, the priest, who carried the ephod, the sacred garment containing the Urim and Thummim. When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod." David then asked very specific questions of God through this method. First he asked, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" And the Lord answered David, "Go attack the Philistines and rescue Keilah." However, David's men grew fearful upon hearing the Lord's direction. So, David sought confirmation from the Lord once again. After God reassured him of his help, David and his men advanced to Keilah, fought against the Philistines, and rescued its inhabitants. But the inquiry didn't end there. Later, when Saul was plotting to go to Keilah to capture David, David again turned to the Urim and Thummim. David asked, "Will Saul come down to Keilah as your servant has heard?" And the Lord replied, "Yes, he will come down." Then David asked further, "Will the people of Keilah betray me and my men into Saul's hands?" And the Lord answered, "They will betray you." Thanks to this mysterious guidance provided through the Urim and Thummim, David and his men managed to escape from Keilah in time, avoiding capture by Saul. But King Saul himself, in pursuing David, also used this direct channel to God. The outcome was shocking. His own son Jonathan was revealed as guilty of breaking a royal decree. During a fierce battle against the Philistines, Saul put an oath upon his army, declaring, "Cursed be the man who eats food before evening, before I have taken vengeance upon my enemies." However, his son Jonathan, unaware of his father's oath, found a honeycomb in the forest. Exhausted from battle, he tasted a little honey, regaining his strength. Later, when Saul sought advice from God through the Urim and Thummim about whether to continue pursuing the Philistines during the night, the Lord gave him no answer. This divine silence deeply disturbed Saul, who took it as a sign that sin among the people had broken their communication with God. Determined to find the guilty party, Saul turned to the Urim and Thummim. He declared that even if the guilt fell upon his son Jonathan, he would surely die. The Urim and Thummim first singled out Saul and Jonathan from among the people and then unmistakably indicated Jonathan. Then Saul said, "Cast lots between me and my son Jonathan." And the lot fell on Jonathan. When it emerged that Jonathan had unknowingly tasted honey, thus unintentionally breaking his father's solemn vow, Saul felt bound by his word and by the sacred outcome and sentenced his son to death. "Indeed, Jonathan, you must surely die," declared the king at the people. Mindful of Jonathan's bravery and the great victory he had brought to Israel that day, courageously stepped forward to plead on his behalf. They reminded Saul that Jonathan had acted alongside God to achieve this great triumph, and thus they rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. This dramatic event illustrates the seriousness with which vows and sacred inquiries were regarded. 2. A talking donkey speaks with the seer. Balaam. The prophet Balaam had been summoned by the king of Moab to curse the nation of Israel, which had set up camp near his borders. As Balaam journeyed, riding his donkey, accompanied by 2 servants, an angel of the Lord appeared on the path ahead, sword drawn, invisible to the prophet's eyes, yet clearly seen by the donkey. The first time the donkey saw the angel, she veered off the road into a field, without understanding why Balaam struck the animal to steer her back onto the path. Soon afterward, the angel stood in a narrow path running between two vineyards with walls on either side. Upon seeing the angel again, the donkey pressed herself against one wall, crushing Balaam's foot. Furious, the prophet struck her once more. A third time, the angel positioned himself in an even narrower spot, leaving no way around. Seeing him, the donkey simply laid down under Balaam, angrily. The prophet's temper boiled over, and he struck the animal harder than before with his staff. At that very moment, something extraordinary happened. The Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've struck me these 3 times?" In his anger, Balaam even began responding to the animal. At that moment, the Lord allowed Balaam to see the angel. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the path with his sword drawn. Immediately Balaam bowed down and fell on his face. Balaam knelt and placed his face to the ground. The angel rebuked him for his cruelty toward the animal, who had saved his life by turning aside, and reminded him that his way was perverse in God's sight. 3. The handwriting on the wall. In the magnificent palace of Babylon, King Belshazzar hosted a lavish feast for 1,000 of his nobles, wives, and concubines. In the midst of drunken revelry, Belshazzar committed an act of serious sacrilege. He ordered that the gold and silver vessels taken by his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar from the temple of God in Jerusalem be brought out. With these holy cups, the king and his guests toasted, praising their idols of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. But at the height of their celebration, a mysterious event occurred, causing terror among everyone present. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the fingers of a human hand appeared before the eyes of all the guests. The fingers began writing strange, cryptic words onto the plaster of the palace wall, illuminated by a nearby lampstand. The words written were men Telepin. King Belshazzar was struck with terror. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. In haste, the king summoned all his wise men, magicians, Chaldeans, and astrologers, promising rich rewards to anyone who could read the writing and interpret its meaning. But none of them, despite all their acclaimed wisdom, could decipher the message. In the midst of this confusion, the Queen Mother remembered Daniel, prophet renowned since Nebuchadnezzar's reign for his divine insight. Daniel was brought before the king, and refusing the offered rewards, proceeded to reveal God's judgment. The words written were mean, may tickle a parson. Daniel interpreted them, "Thus God has numbered the days of your kingdom and has brought it to an end. Tickle, you have been weighed on the scales and found lacking. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians." God's verdict was swift and irrevocable. That very night, just as Daniel had foretold, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede took control of the kingdom. This event endures as a solemn reminder of God's sovereign power over earthly kingdoms, his judgment against arrogance and profanity. For the prohibition against boiling a young goat in its mother's milk, there is one biblical prohibition that has drawn considerable curiosity among scholars. It appears 3 distinct times in the Old Testament, specifically in Exodus and Deuteronomy, clearly commanded as follows. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. It attracts attention because rather than being a general dietary restriction, it is curiously specific, forbidding cooking a young goat in the milk of its own mother. The original meaning behind this prohibition has inspired various interpretations. Some biblical scholars suggest it was likely intended to counter pagan rituals, which possibly involve such types of cooking for superstitious or fertility-related ceremonies. Other scholars believe the law aimed at cultivating compassion and respect for the natural order and the parental bond between mother and offspring, forbidding a practice that would seem insensitive or cruel. Using the very food intended for sustaining life to boil the offspring itself. This law is repeated multiple times in the Torah and forms a fundamental underpinning for Jewish dietary laws, laying the groundwork for the strict separation between consuming meat and dairy products. 5. Moses sees the back of God. In the book of Exodus, Moses asked to see God's glory. After interceding for the Israelites and enjoying a unique closeness with the Lord, Moses boldly made an audacious request. "Please show me your glory." God's response was solemn. He informed Moses that he would pass before him so he could perceive his presence, yet he issued a critical warning. "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." However, in an extraordinary act of grace toward his servant, God granted Moses an unparalleled experience. He allowed Moses to behold his back. To accomplish this, God instructed him to stand upon a rock and explained, "When my glory passes by, I will place you in a cliff of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed. Afterwards, I will remove my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." Thus shielded by the divine hand in the rock's cleft, Moses witnessed a veiled manifestation of God's presence, described figuratively as his back once his full glory had passed by. This anthropomorphic depiction of God has inspired profound reflection. What exactly did Moses see? The text does not provide explicit detail, leaving the exact nature of this vision a profound mystery. The prevailing interpretation of this passage is that no human can behold God's face and survive due to the overwhelming intensity of his majesty. Yet the Father graciously provided Moses a means to glimpse a measure of his glory without being consumed. 6. Jesus writes in the sand and contradicts the Old Testament. The Old Testament outlines severe punishments for certain sins in its effort to establish an orderly society under the covenant with God. Among these punishments, stoning, putting someone to death by the community's throwing of stones, stood out as the ultimate penalty reserved for offenses deemed especially grave. Crimes such as blasphemy, idolatry, witchcraft, or sexual sins like adultery could trigger this sentence. The intention was to purge evil from among the people and uphold the holiness of the covenant. A clear example of this practice is recounted in the book of Numbers. While the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath, a task forbidden by law. They brought the man before Moses. After Moses consulted the Lord about what must be done, the divine instruction came. Back clear. The man was ordered to be stoned to death by the entire community outside the camp. And so it was done faithfully, fulfilling the Lord's command. This story illustrates the seriousness with which obedience to God's law was upheld in those days. Yet when we arrive at the New Testament, we encounter a transformative episode involving Jesus that shifts the understanding of this punishment. In the Gospel of John, we find the story of how the scribes and Pharisees brought before Jesus a woman caught in the very act of adultery. They placed her in the midst of the crowd, citing the law of Moses, which ordered that such women be stoned, and asked Jesus what he believed should be done. Rather than immediately responding, Jesus calmly bent down and wrote with his finger in the dust as though he hadn't heard them. When they pressed him further, he stood and uttered words that still echoed today as a proverbial saying, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Then once again he stooped down, continuing to write in the dirt. Ashamed, her accusers began slipping away one by one, beginning from the oldest down to the youngest, until finally, only Jesus and the woman were left standing. Jesus straightened up and, seeing no one but the woman, asked Hieromen, "Where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." With this act, Jesus openly challenged Old Testament teachings. He introduced a radical principle of compassion, offering the woman a chance to repent and start a new life, rather than subjecting her to condemnation dictated by the law. 7. Jesus curses and withers a fig tree. The Gospel of Mark presents us with an unusual episode involving Jesus, the cursing of a fig tree. This incident occurred during the days leading up to his passion, when Jesus and his disciples were traveling from Bethany to Jerusalem. The story recounts that Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a lush fig tree covered in leaves which might suggest early fruit, he approached it to see if he could find anything there. Yet when he arrived, he found nothing but leaves. Faced with its barrenness, Jesus spoke stern and direct words to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." What is especially curious about this passage is that Mark himself clarifies, it was perfectly normal for the fig tree to have no fruit because it wasn't the season yet. But when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Disciples heard this pronouncement. The next morning, when they passed by again, the event is described as immediate according to Matthew's account. The disciples were stunned to see the fig tree withered from the roots. Jesus' action of cursing this tree because it had no fruit, particularly when the very gospel states clearly that it wasn't yet the season for figs, has puzzled many readers and led to various interpretations. Clearly, this event was not a mere outburst because of hunger. Rather, it was a symbolic act filled with deeper meaning. Scholars and theologians often emphasize how in the Old Testament the fig tree frequently stood as a symbol for the nation of Israel. Thus, a fig tree filled with abundant foliage, promising fruit but delivering none, is understood to represent the spiritual condition of much of Israel at the time of Jesus, particularly its religious leadership. There was an outward appearance of godliness and faith, but genuine spiritual fruit was often lacking. Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem and his lament over the city's spiritual condition both took place during this same time frame, emphasizing the notion of divine judgment upon spiritual barrenness. 8. The second death after hell. The Bible describes the final eternal fate of those who radically oppose God and persist in evil. It is portrayed as a place burning with fire and sulfur, signifying complete and final punishment commonly known as the second death. This place appears multiple times throughout Scripture, accompanied by descriptions of those who will eventually be cast there. The first mention occurs following the great final battle, often known as Armageddon, as described in Revelation. It states clearly that the beast and the false prophet who deceived the world into worshiping the beast are captured. The text explicitly says these two were thrown alive into a lake of burning fire, and the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, the two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. Later in Revelation 20, after a 1,000-year period in which Satan is bound, the Bible recounts that the devil is released for a brief time and once again deceives nations into a final rebellion against God. However, his defeat is absolute. The passage declares the devil himself will join the beast and the false prophet in the lake of fire and brimstone. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Following the judgment before the great white throne, where the dead are judged according to their deeds, and the book of life is opened, Revelation unveils one final awe-inspiring act. Death itself and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. This signifies the ultimate annihilation of death as a ruling power. Moreover, it conclusively states that whoever's name was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. This group includes the cowardly and unbelieving, the detestable and murderers, the sexually immoral and sorcerers, the idolaters and all liars. They will have their share in the lake, burning with fire and brimstone. This is the second death. It is specifically described as the second death. The lake of fire is presented as the ultimate and everlasting consequence. 9. The mysterious being Melchizedek. The Bible describes a being who has neither father nor mother, no genealogy, no beginning nor end. Although seemingly impossible, this mysterious figure emerges suddenly, blesses Abraham, and disappears. Melchizedek is a figure who appears briefly in the book of Genesis, and whose significance is profound, particularly highlighted in the letter to the Hebrews. His appearance is as sudden as it is meaningful, leaving behind an aura of mystery that has long fascinated biblical scholars. The story takes place after Abraham returned victorious from a battle to rescue his nephew Lot. At that moment, Melchizedek, the priest of God Most High, came out to greet Abraham. He brought no war tributes with him, but instead offered bread and wine, symbols of sustenance and fellowship. Then Melchizedek blessed Abraham in the name of God Most High. And Abraham, in recognition of Melchizedek's spiritual authority, gave him 1/10 of all the spoils. After this sudden interaction, Melchizedek abruptly disappears from the narrative in Genesis. Then Melchizedek blessed him, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." The mystery deepens as Melchizedek does not reappear, until much later in the New Testament within the letter to the Hebrews. There he is uniquely described. "For this Melchizedek, priest of God Most High, who met Abraham and blessed him, whose name means King of Righteousness, having neither father nor mother nor genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever." This description does not necessarily imply that Melchizedek was a heavenly or non-human being, but rather that the biblical record deliberately leaves out his ancestry and descendants. This lack of earthly genealogy is crucial, as it allows Melchizedek to more perfectly represent the eternal priesthood also held by Jesus Christ. Thus, Melchizedek, whose name translates as King of Righteousness, is introduced to us as a genuine historical figure who served as both king and priest of the true God in very early times. 10. The wheels covered in eyes. The book of the prophet Ezekiel opens with one of the most intricate visions recorded in all Scripture. It is described for us in chapters 1 and 10 of Ezekiel. His vision began with a violent whirlwind, an immense cloud, and a brilliant fire radiating brightness all around. From within this fire came forth four living creatures of extraordinary appearance. Each one had a general human appearance, but possessed four distinct faces. The face of a man in the front, a lion's face on the right side, an ox's face on the left, and an eagle's face at the back. Each creature also had four wings to spread upward, touching each other, while the other two covered their bodies. Their legs were straight, and their feet resembled calves' hooves, gleaming like polished bronze. Beneath their wings, on all four sides, they had human hands. They moved forward with unwavering determination, always straight ahead, never needing to turn. Next to each of these living beings was an astonishing wheel, intersected by another wheel within it, appearing like gyroscopic spheres that could immediately move in any of the four directions. These wheels shone brilliantly, and their rims were completely covered with eyes. This was, in the prophet's words, the vision of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. This vision, with its intricate imagery of angelic beings, all-seeing wheels, and indescribable divine glory, has intrigued and mystified interpreters for centuries, as it symbolizes God's omniscience and transcendent mobility. 11. The creatures Leviathan, Behemoth, and Rim. The Bible presents a fascinating bestiary of creatures, some majestic and frightening, others symbolic and mysterious. These beings sometimes highlight God's creative power, or in certain cases represent the forces of chaos and desolation. Leviathan. In the book of Job 41, God himself describes Leviathan. It is portrayed as a colossal sea creature covered with impenetrable scales, tightly joined like shields, and from its nostrils smoke pours forth. No human weapon can subdue it. Its heart is as firm as a millstone, and its passage through the sea leaves behind a luminous trail. The Psalms also mention it as a creature with whom God plays in the vast waters. The prophet Isaiah also speaks of it, saying, "In that day the Lord will punish with his fierce, great, and mighty sword Leviathan, the swift serpent. Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that lives in the sea." Leviathan embodies the raw, primal strength of creation and God's immeasurable dominion over the forces of chaos. Behemoth. Just before describing Leviathan in Job 40, God introduces Behemoth. "Behold now Behemoth, says the Lord, whom I made just as I made you. He feeds on grass like an ox." Behemoth is portrayed with tremendous strength in his loins and powerful muscles in his belly, swinging his tail like a cedar tree. His bones are like bars of bronze, and his limbs like rods of iron. While some have attempted to identify Behemoth with familiar animals such as the hippopotamus or elephant, the biblical portrayal grants it qualities far exceeding these creatures, presenting it as an extraordinary masterpiece of God's creative power on the earth, a majestic creature that only its maker can tame. The ram, mentioned throughout various passages of the Old Testament, such as in Numbers, Job, and the Psalms. The ram symbolizes an animal of immense strength and ferocious power. Some older translations, including the King James Version, rendered it as unicorn, sparking abundant curiosity. Modern scholarship strongly suggests that the ram actually refers to a now extinct wild ox, known for its immense size and strength. The Bible uses this creature to illustrate the powerful might of God and his unique ability to subdue the forces of nature. In Job 39, God asks rhetorically, "Will the ram consent to serve you? Will it spend the night by your manger? Can you bind the ram?" These passages intrigued you? Get ready, because what you've just seen is merely an introduction to even deeper mysteries hidden in the Bible. Even a simple list of biblical names conceals a coded divine message, a phrase of profound meaning. Click the video on your screen right now to uncover this hidden message and other breathtaking secrets